Good evening. Good evening. My name is Elizabeth East. I'm one of the directors here at LA Louver Gallery. And welcome to this conversation this evening between Ben Jackel and Christopher Miles. Known both Ben and Christopher for some years. I'd like to introduce first Christopher, who is a gentleman to my immediate right, stage left. Christopher Miles is an artist. He is a curator, he's a writer, and an educator. Between 1995 and 2010, Chris wrote extensively about art, in particular Los Angeles art, and he also curated many exhibitions in the LA area, most notably the exhibition called Thing at the Hammer. Since 2010, Christopher has devoted most of his time, well, maybe not most of his time, but certainly his focus to his studio practice as an artist while continuing to teach. Since 1998, he has taught at a number of institutions here in Southern California, and most notably at California State Long Beach, where he has held a number of distinguished positions, including that of interim dean. So first of all, I'd like you all to welcome Christopher. I should actually add that he had an absolutely beautiful show in 2013 at the Pasadena Museum of California Art. And if you didn't actually visit that show, please do check that out online. It was a really extraordinary exhibition. Second, I'd like to welcome Ben Jackel. Ben was born in Aurora, Colorado. He went to the University of Colorado for his first degree before coming to Los Angeles to pursue his MFA at UCLA. At UCLA, he studied under other notable professors, including Adrian Sachs, who I'm happy to see in the audience tonight. After graduating, he left to work with Charlie Ray, another one of his professors at UCLA, and rose to head of that studio. More recently, he has devoted his time to pursuing his art entirely as a full-time profession. I'm pleased to say that we introduced his work to our audience in 2007 in our Rogue Wave show, which was one of our series of group exhibitions devoted to Los Angeles art. And following that, we had 2 solo shows here prior to the one you see downstairs. Ben has already shown his work quite extensively throughout the world. It's been seen in far-flung places from Beijing, Tokyo, Bethlehem, Bogota, Madrid, Basel, and Palestine. So he actually has an extraordinary international outlook. And I'm also pleased to say that his work will be seen this summer as part of the Venice Biennale. He will be one of a group of 20 artists being presented there under Bardo Arlet in an exhibition curated by Elizabeth Batinsky. Closer to date, Ben will be showing work actually at the Denver Art Museum, and on April 8th we'll be traveling there to present a lecture in advance of that exhibition opening. So please join me now to welcome Ben Jackel. So I'm going to cede the floor to our 2 guests. The evening will probably last around 45 minutes or so. There will be questions at the end. And thank you very much for coming again.
Okay. Can you hear? Yes? Okay. We're going to start just by, and I'm going to let Ben narrate. We're going to just look quickly through some slides, a lot of which are sort of some behind the scenes and studio shots of the work, mostly the work downstairs in progress.
Yeah, there's some source material, work in progress, and then pieces that are finished. And I just want to say thank you all so much for coming out here to listen to us. I really appreciate your support, and let's have some fun here. All right.
Okay.
So these are 2 helmets at the Metropolitan Museum in New York that I've noticed for many years. And then this is just the process of building those, a kind of a modified coil process. So some of the source material, when I see it like this, I instantly know this is going to become a sculpture. Through the research, there's a lot of pieces, good and bad, but sometimes it's just instant. So when I saw these arms, I knew that this was going to be a piece. So with coil building, I found that you can more or less build anything you want. The process, all the clay is so well intertwined and uniform, united, versus a slab building where there's lots of pieces that come together. I've had a lot more success building with coils, even if it doesn't look like a shape that would require a coil. Just everything is really connected. It's in the kiln. And so in these pieces, you can see the scale changes there. I'm not just replicating them in a different material, but by making these things twice as large as the original object, there's just, the feeling of power is there. It's there anyways, but it's just kind of right in your face, a little more intimidating. And with that scale, it shifts the thing into an abstract space where it's a little harder to recognize as armor for someone's arms. I like to turn the pieces into a place where there's just an abstraction starts to occur. Yep. Yeah, the truck is handy. Yeah. That's graphite I'm putting on the surface there. Yeah. Lots of hours of swinging that axe. So I like, in these drones, I made 10 drones at this point. And following the progress along the way, it's these kind of, corporate shots of the drone safely patrolling, looking so glamorous. And then, the transforming that thing into a little more ominous looking object. So these were my uncle's father's brass knuckles that he carried with him in World War II when he assaulted the islands of Attu and Kiska in the Aleutian Islands. Not many people know the Japanese invaded part of Alaska, and these Americans went in to dislodge them in kind of a crazy Arctic battle that's very, very odd in the history of World War II. And these things sat around for 70 years, and I received them a few years ago, and after kind of just handling them, it just occurred to me I had to make them into a piece. So these are silicone molds of the parts of the knuckles. And that's a wax setup, like the lost wax process. And those parts are welded together. And then just refined and refined. Yeah. So the propeller downstairs is, I couldn't make it as big as I wanted to, but it's based on these new gigantic propellers. Maybe I'll make one this big one day, we'll see. But right now I had to settle for a piece that was, I started with an 80-pound block of mahogany. That was a solid disc of wood. And these new propellers that are on all our cargo ships, all our military, all our food, these push everything around the world. These are some of the most important objects, I think, that exist. You take these off the ships, everything is over for our society. And they're so beautiful, but they're hidden under the water. So revealing this thing, transforming it, and these new propellers are not your grandfather's propellers, it's the little nubs. These are just such beautiful forms, optimized for, you can see they do all different types of jobs for different ships. So a lot of forms, but just what wonderful variation there. lot of grinding. And most of that was done with just an ankle grinder, and then I go on to hand tools, rasps, and files. So this is the side of a destroyer in Georgetown Navy Yard in Washington, D.C. And you can see a couple of pieces came out of this shot right here. And you take it, I'm on a ship, I take a picture. A couple of years later, I review it again, and you can see the sea strainer right there, exactly as I have it laid out, and then the wrapped hose to the right there. So, it takes a while to re-see them sometimes. That wrapped hose, I had to sit on that for a few years to think about it. So this is one of our newest warships, USS Zumwalt. I doubt most of you have seen this ship before. Cutting edge of new Navy engineering technology. It's that kind of a stealth destroyer. This is a whole new type of ship that the world's really never seen. And I've been following this thing. I think I've seen drawings of this thing for, I feel, decades almost, as they promised this new high-tech ship. And it's real. It's in the water now, and it's just an odd-looking thing. So I like to make things that are new or really old in their oddity, so that no one has seen this. I own kind of the image in a way that I can let you see it for the first time, and it really is a foreign object to you then. You also all helped fund this project, so just so you know that. This is about $1 billion warship, and it wouldn't be possible without all the tax base there. I keep it really rough to kind of keep in mind the nature of the object. This is this gives out violence. This is what this is meant for. So this isn't my work. A little side note here. This is the USS Iowa. I'm sure a lot of you know that I'm involved in volunteering on board the ship. Go forward. Down in San Pedro. So these are shots of the ship in World War II. And this has become a big influence on my work, I think, the way I'm seeing things. This is my shot on the ship from last year. It's been here for about 3 years. I've been first started volunteering, just leading tours and kind of working with the crew, but kind of taken over as the chief brass technician on the ship. And you can see here, yeah. It's kind of a whole other persona that I have down there. Pull my hair back, not really an artist, more of a technician at that point. And this was a project that I got to work on. The binnacle of the ship is where the compass is, the main navigational tool for the ship. I stripped the paint off and then polished it, replaced the glass, and painted those cylinders and kind of rebuilt the whole thing. Really a beautiful object. And since then, I've probably repolished it about 15 times, maybe. And it's just a wonderful thing to, maybe takes 20 minutes to sit up there, watch the cargo ships going by or not going by. And yeah, and so then there's the ship, but then my crewmate, here's the bridge, the armored bridge. That's where the helm for the ship is. So I think you can see some forms there that maybe I haven't used yet, but I think look like some of my work. And then my assorted crew of motley old sailors, pretty much. And myself. And I've only ever been on the ship, after the first interview, I've only ever been on the ship in this uniform, so it's like a whole nother kind of persona. I almost feel like I'm an undercover artist, like posing as like a Navy tour guide. But I have a lot of Navy knowledge. It's kind of been stacking up my whole life, and then all of a sudden there was a ship here and some place for me to put it. So the ship is one thing, but the people, the crewmates that I've established, the veterans from many wars, that was something that was missing. I wanted to find a place to interact with veterans, and this just showed up, and it kind of pulled everything together. I was just on the ship yesterday. This is the model shop of the ship. They just kind of, these historic ships always have a model shop where they're building, old ships to kind of look at. And some of you recognize those are two of my ships from 2 exhibitions ago here. And I brought them down to show along with the other ships. And it was just an open house. The first day opened the shop, so it was fun to have my ship inside of one of these ships. And one of the gentlemen in the previous photos was on one of the ships when it was sunk by a battleship in the last battle of World War II. So he's seen those ships, and I've kind of completed a cycle that I didn't expect to fulfill, where I actually got to meet someone who was on the ship that I built years ago, and he knows me, and he looks forward to seeing me on the ship now. So very rewarding thing, and it's just getting started. I have a show in mind of images based on this ship, the Iowa project, that is it's growing. It'll take a little while to pull it all together, I think, but it's a slow process. And I think that's it.
So we're going to chat a little bit, and then after that, we'll open it up for questions from the group. And I guess, can we still hear okay? Yeah? So my first question, Ben, would just be about how these things tie together for you in your mind. When I think about on the one hand, I think the way you handle the objects visually and materially results in a certain kind of cohesion when one first enters the exhibition downstairs, when one enters other exhibitions in the past, and there are certain kind of categorical overlays, and at the same time there's this real variety. There's incredible historical variety. There's a lot of different kind of technology, military technology, offensive technology, defensive technology, more what I would call kind of civilian or civil or citizen technology, protective technology. And so I'm just wondering how that all ties together, and how that becomes a show, and how that becomes sort of a practice for you.
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. I mean, that's just my subconscious brain swirling around there. Mm-hmm. It's hard. That's what I'm trying to find out, I think. I think when I put the show together, there's no answers on the table for me. I'm really thinking about just continued questions for everyone else. If you have an answer from your sculpture, it's fun for a little while. So I did note, as you have, that actually Adrian pointed out to me when he was speaking about my work a few years ago. That's when I first realized that color, I've kind of established a mechanism where I can pull together any form through them, whether it's wood or clay or metal now, and, through the color, through that darkness, right? And I do like that does help me include anything I want. It gives me, all artists want to be free to choose whatever they want to work on, I think. And I think I was aware enough as I started developing the work over the last decade to see that I wanted to keep doors open for myself. I mean, I remember thinking for the first show a lot about that I wanted to have a big wooden chopped thing and a really delicate wood thing and a loose clay thing, a figure, little figures, different elements, so that I wouldn't be, I think from the audience viewpoint, pigeonholed into any one kind of thing. I'm not the guy that makes ships, and then the next show could be all that stuff mixed up, or it could just be a bunch of axe chop things. So I still want to give myself a lot of room. I just want more leeway, not less. I think we can see some artists can get so specific, they just have to keep making that thing, or variations on that. I just want to be able to view any object that catches me, and these are just the objects I think that catch me like that. I say that beauty is the kind of prerequisite to start. It has to be pretty for me. I don't think anything I make is not just attractive as an object. That hopefully other people, and that hopefully other people see, but I think through my editing process and seeing tons and tons of helmets and other ships, that when one jumps out at me, and I've seen so much of that, if it's fresh for me, I know it'll be fresh for other people.
I'm curious about I guess how you think about your relationship to these things, because when I look at the things that you represent, they're things that I have. I guess I would say I have a complicated relationship to them in terms of how I think about them, and a conflicted relationship to them, and I can't imagine that you don't have a conflicted relationship to some of these things. I'm wondering if you could talk about that a little bit.
A very, very conflicted relationship. I mean, the whole body of the military imagery came from the invasion of Iraq when I was just starting at graduate school. The first semester we invaded Iraq. I was searching for a new piece, a new direction. I was doing kind of abstracted hand sculptures at the time. That at that point were bad. And I made a canon. I think I wanted to. We're invading, and I thought, I'm going to study the Civil War, American Civil War, to figure out, how bad it can get. We're just going into this new war here, and that kind of, that flowed from there. So as kind of a protest, this is happening. I'm an artist. I'm a young artist who, so this all goes back a little further to, I think, my childhood of being a wrestler, a varsity wrestler, someone who made toy guns and toy swords all the time, was always interested in, from 5 years old, my hand was raised up when I won in that match against that person. Violence was a comfortable place to be, a place that you hang out with your friends at on the wrestling mat, right? So I grew up loving that in a way. It's just who I am. You can't help that, loving to make guns, but then becoming a moral, rational adult, seeing those conflicts, I think, early on through high school, the conflictions with, the fun video game killing and the actual killing. So I think they're conflicting to me because I feel an instinct for the interest in these forms and kind of what they do, but it's just the worst thing at the same time. These drones drop bombs on families. And then just the fact that any work could be looked at from so many different perspectives from what side of you are on. It's so gray. There's no answer there. These drones are protectors for a lot of people. They're, the worst nightmare for a lot of people.
Do you think of yourself as having a specific kind of position vis-a-vis these objects? I think of the presentation it's very interesting to me because when I walk around the show, when I've experienced the work in the past, I can't help but really, as a reference point, think of minimalist sculpture. And yet, when I think about the kind of the minimalist rhetoric and aspiration towards a kind of a referentiality, which of course has been debated, and one of the debates with minimalism has been about its kind of embodiment or abstract representation of power and industry. And when I see some of the, I guess what I would say kind of some of the formal and presentational aspects and some of the refining of form downstairs, it's odd to me. I'm less transported in some cases, say, to the armory displays in a place like the Met than I am to thoughts about Donald Judd sculptures, and so I'm interested in the relationship, the kind of distancing in some ways from reference that some of the minimalist artists aspired to, and your relationship and distance or proximity to reference in these cases, in the case of these objects.
I want to pull that stuff in, I think. That's been there. We've seen the forms that are beautiful arrangements of space, objects, I think. I'm not really trying to reference them per se, but I think they occupy the same space. There's considerations. All my work, I kind of pare down the object a little. It gets a little smoother. It loses this little detail or that detail, for the form. And I'm interested in the form of these things. I think the same way the minimalists were, but this is postmodernism, I feel like. And I had a really great teacher in college that really opened up what postmodernism was meaning, in 1999 or something, and that you can put meaning back into work and the pushback against that. So I kind of want to play it both ways. I want to have the meaning there and available if you want to find it, if you have background knowledge of the object, but I want it to just stand there and be a beautiful thing that anybody can appreciate without any knowledge of the thing. And maybe it's even better that way, I think, if you don't know what it is.
I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about the decisions in combination of, say material crafting method and object of reference. I'm curious, for instance, that some of some of the objects that are older, that are more historical, whether they're centuries-old helmets, whether they're World War II technology, delicately, carefully hand replicated, though not totally precise. Often, still a touch of hand. And then, yet, the most recent reference in the exhibition, the stealth ship, which you showed, which has been built but hasn't even yet been formally deployed or commissioned, is something that's raw, hand-hewn out of wood. And so I'm curious about those kinds of contradictions or overlays.
I mean, I think any piece you start feeling kind of a gut reaction of what the thing is going to be. It's that ship. I mean, there's some technical concerns also. You can't make some things out of clay, no matter how much you want to. The drones would not work made out of stoneware. That would just be a losing battle. So maybe you start, sure. I mean, you could figure anything out, right? But, so maybe you start with just those concerns, what would make sense here, and then they kind of move back and forth. Maybe you'll think of different parts being made different materials. I mean, the big axes, I started making those pieces with an axe to loosen up myself. So I want that loose touch there. It makes sense. It's an axe. It's big. The resolution, when you stand back, it still looks like a detailed object because it's so big. The clay pieces, I like to transform them to flip them, I guess. So making the fire hydrants, casting those in bronze, doesn't make any sense to me. And I think it's not interesting at all. Making those out of clay, because it's not what you expect. And then, the fact that it was fire that created these pieces that are now representations of fighting fire is more interesting. So that ship, it's so fine and perfect, and just that, what a beautiful object. So by chopping it, I'm kind of maybe degrading it a little bit, and like I said, showing the kind of, the impact of this thing that it's going to exert.
Something that I think inevitably comes up again and again is the issue of representing power and different kinds of might, different kinds of might, military might, economic might, industrial might. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, and I would say also sort of where you stand in relationship to those kinds of power.
Yeah. I'm definitely very interested in those ideas. Through reading history, who had the power over time, who did win, what happened, it's all there. But then we live in a world where that's playing out day by day. How much you decide to involve yourself or learn about the thing, it's there. It is controlling. So there's that kind of government, bigger power or whatever, right? And some of the pieces are the power of self-empowerment, to grab that fire hose and save the ship yourself, or your apartment, or whatever the piece happens to be. So I'm interested in individuals' power, and then the power being taken away from the individual, I think. The helmet empowers the one wearer, and because they are vulnerable. When I first started making those, I thought more about the power, and then it turned into more of the vulnerability that they're really talking about, that we're weak. By wearing them, you have to acknowledge that. So some are just to protect you, but they are, especially the fancy ones for the wealthy, the aristocracy, they are about pushing the power outwards, not just their own body defensively, but controlling. So they can operate both ways, I think. I mean, there's powers, and it's a weird thing to talk about. It's involved in every situation in some way or another. From government bombing people to two people having a conversation. And maybe being a wrestler, I'm interested in that power too. I mean, it's a simple thing that you take another man and put him on his back against his will. It's really fundamental. You can build on there and everything else. And then maybe I live a life where I think about wanting to be victorious, whatever that means, accomplish the goal.
What does it mean?
I don't know. That's what I'm trying to figure out. It means it's better to have your hand raised than not have your hand raised after the interaction. And that's whatever that means to yourself. It's not as black and white as someone literally raising your hand, but it was once. So I don't know what that means really. I mean, happiness, I don't know.
I'm curious, I mean, I think that issue of of power and relationship relative to another individual or relationship relative to another group, kind of mitigated by technology, mitigated by industry. One of the things when I walk around the show downstairs and I think about your last large exhibition here, there's something about about that movement through history, different periods. You know, number one, you're reminded of how these themes don't leave us, right? How in some ways, you know, we maybe have not evolved as people as much as the technology has evolved, right? And then I think the other thing is that the historical kind of hopscotching around puts you in that position of having a kind of relative and contextual relationship to those different periods. Who do you relate to in a power relationship represented by one object versus who you might relate to in a power relationship represented by another object? So there's an issue of positioning for the viewer historically. There's an issue of positioning for the viewer, I think, also relative to the field of sculpture, the history of sculpture, and the objects that are represented. And I'm wondering if you think about how you are positioning yourself in relation to a field of sculpture, current sculpture, as well as an historical lineage, and also positioning yourself relative to the current political and historical moment.
Sure. Well, I think it's part of the job of artists to reflect back what their time is about. I have the particular training or skill set that I have. And maybe when we were invading, I felt maybe a little guilty that I wasn't with those guys, my generation of young warriors fighting abroad, in American style. But I knew, so that's the conflict. I knew I wouldn't want to be there. I want to make these sculptures. So could you exemplify a little bit there?
Well, I'm curious about if you feel that this work is staking a particular position in the current field of sculpture.
Sure. So, current field, I like to walk through the Met and think, could my stuff be here, in the long term? Is it quality enough to hang with all of this stuff that's been going on for, like you said, so long? And I strive to make things that are that fine as objects, right, just in that sense. What's going on now, I do want to have made work talking about all these, I think, very important issues while I'm alive. I want to have it be in the record that I made work about these things while they were happening. That's important to me. And then as far as the art world, maybe then, I think most of the trends are moving in a different way than I'm working. I don't think we're in an age of material refinement. Maybe in some levels, on ultra high, levels of art being made today. But I like kind of swimming against the current. I like knowing there's not a lot of work that looks like mine out there, that's made like mine. I feel like I'm lucky to have developed a craft that is kind of unique, and then I can move between materials and I want to set my own, I want to make great work and set a standard and show what I think can be done by someone with their own hands, by themselves in a studio, and be talking about the biggest issues of our time, I think, at least the way, for me at this point. So yeah, I guess that's.
Should we take a few questions from the?
Yeah.
Okay. Are there questions from the group? Okay.
I think we have extra mics for that, so wait for the mic. Thanks, Lisa.
It's just a technical question. Use beeswax. Is that the same type of wax they put on skis, or is it?
I think people probably have used beeswax for skiing. I definitely use beeswax for my sculptures to give that kind of shiny feel. But I'm not sure what that, it's probably, I would guess they'd use a harder wax for skis, I would think.
Okay, so I mean, some wax is sticky.
Sure.
Like the surfer.
This is fairly sticky. It's similar to surf wax in its consistency. It's a different wax, but it feels kind of like that.
Yeah.
I use a heat gun to melt it, and it drips on, and then I just kind of smooth it in and reheat it until it's just a little bit of a sheen, but there's no visible wax residue.
Yeah, you mix color in the wax, or you paint it first and then wax it?
The color is just from the clay, so there's no color in the wax. I have tried putting graphite and things in the wax, but it kind of muddles it. It looks like a muddy color on the surface. But yeah, the clay is just a beautiful clay. I mean, these materials, I'm obviously ultra specific about these materials that all kind of have similar characteristics. The graphite lets me cover the wood and kind of hide its woodness. The beeswax lets me kind of hide the clay nature of the clay object, so that they all kind of enter this realm together where there's ambiguity, and you need to explore the piece to figure out what's going on there. I'm not trying to fool anybody. I just want you to look closer. I don't want you to just know it in a second. You look at the piece, big piece of wood. Putting that graphite on hides the truth of that object for a little while.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Wendell.
I'm actually going to ask a similar question regarding the clay. What is the clay composition, and do you infuse a pigment to create that patina that you have?
No, that's just a commercial clay called B3 Brown from Laguna. They put, I think there's manganese and other dark materials in there, but they keep
Laguna
that.
clay, you're saying?
It's called B3 Brown.
But Laguna clay?
Yeah, Laguna.
Company?
Yeah, they have a similar clay, Cassius at Aardvark. Those are the two clay places in town. It's just a great material. Yeah, I mean, they keep what's in it secret, so I don't even know for sure, but it's it's great stuff.
Any other questions?
Nope.
Thank you, guys. It's very interesting. Ben, I was just curious about what is, I mean, I had a certain reaction to the drones, and I have a lot of stuff going on about drones in general. So I was just wondered what you were trying to show in your representation.
Well, I had always made model airplanes since I was a little kid. And I think just something fundamental changed when, I started hearing about these 2009, we first started conducting strikes in Pakistan against high-level al-Qaeda operatives. And there was one, it kind of began then, the numbers just go up. And I'd heard about it. What is doing this? What are we using over there? And I saw the first Predator drone for the first time. And, the shape of its head, that pilotless space, these planes that had no cockpit in them. It just fundamentally changed the way those planes had looked for 100 years now. And then, obviously, all the moral, social implications that go along with that, but they just had this presence. And I think they've changed everything. And so I made the Predator right away there. And I wanted to be making them as it was happening, to be really on the thing, to be participating in this conversation as much as I could, being a sculptor. I'm not a politician or whatever. I can't make policy, but I can make these images. And they're complicated, like we said. Some people see them and just think they're probably very cool looking airplanes. Some people probably think of them as really terrifying looking things. And it seems like, as I progressed through these, it became more in the news cycle all the time. It was an obscure story when I first started making these drones. No one had seen these. And now, there's been probably, tens of billions of dollars put into the research. And all the planes I made were always kind of on the leading edge. So, again, no one had seen them when I showed these really crazy looking planes. But it's important to me that they are real planes, that these things are happening. And, it went so far that I think I saw a picture of the next manned fighter plane that they're developing. And seeing a cockpit in that plane actually looked awkward and wrong almost. Like the planes, they're so much more graceful with that guy taken out, the design that's capable. It seemed like, why are we building a plane that has a man in it at this point that will cost us $1 trillion or something to make? And it just looked awkward to me. It's funny, like my eye had changed looking at those. And as we proceed, as they make new, I mean, I think they just keep making really fantastic designs, sculptures that some of these pieces is just, that's a sculpture. I have to make the thing. Look at that crazy design. It's so beautiful. And using like the finest material, good mahogany is just about as good as it gets. Take it to perfect perfection and just make the thing so precious, but lethal. And you look into that intake or the front of those, and the plane looks back at you. It's not a pilot looking back. I think that there's just an inherent human fear in that since Metropolis, the film, and everything else, the first science fiction. I mean, Frankenstein was the first science fiction, and that's kind of the non-human other. I think the drone is an extension of that.
What a beautiful show, Ben.
Oh, thanks, Rebecca.
Congratulations. It's so great. When I look at the work, I think a lot about archetypical masculinity, and I wonder if that enters into the conversation with you,
Yeah.
because both in form and content, it seems to be a conversation not only of beauty and violence, but of ownership and other. I don't know. I'm just wondering if you think about that when you make the work.
No, all the time, and I think in undergrad, people first started saying I make masculine work, and, become, aware of that and just, embrace the thing. That's the person I am. I throw axes with my friends for fun. I hang out in a battleship when I can. I like big pieces of wood to chop on and make those things, I'd be happy to wrestle anyone in the room here, under the right circumstances. And I don't mind losing, but I'm willing to just go for it. And, and I think that there's a lot of work that's very strong about feminism. I mean, on and on. So much great work, And I'm not trying to make up for that. I'm just being who I am. I mean, I feel like, the challenge for a young artist is kind of to come to grips with who they are and make work about that, I think. And, those things have joined, the throwing axes, the being on this ship, the warrior spirit that I just have, that I am. I just want to let that kind of be free, and just say, I'm a man or whatever, right? In an age where it's not, I don't think, a big movement of, you don't talk about masculine art. No one says that. It sounds weird to say, feminist art, masculine art.
I was thinking about, and this is really cheesy, but I was thinking about Iron John in the 90s when there was this sort of crazy, like drum beating resurgence. Sure. And but what seems to temper it is there is always a kind of a criticality to the work too.
Yeah.
Where I see the embrace, but I also see the question, like you said at the very beginning, that these objects seem to be posing questions about the very things that they're asserting.
Yeah, they're bad things, I mean, say the fire hoses and that are a little different, but that's more just our own maybe personal fear. I'm kind of, I think, indulging or embracing there. But I feel like, by making these bad things that need to be shown to people, someone needs to make these drones to know that they're happening. I think no one knows about them. I feel like I have, and I have it's a small platform, but it's bigger than it was 10 years ago, say, to show people the images I think that are important. And I think those are, and then more so all the time. And those are bad things sometimes. I feel like I kind of had to subject myself to the darkness in a way. Some of the sculptures of, a dead elephant or other dark things. I don't know, I float around in that space. I don't know if it'll all stay black forever, but it just seems right now.
Two sort of different questions. One, the beauty of the object, even if it's a bad thing, attracts you, right? So
Yeah.
I love that contradiction. That's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any debate, is there anything more like emotional, whether it's going to be clay versus wood? Because those are very different mediums to work in. So what makes you decide one's going to be wood and one's going to be clay? And is there ever a debate for you with those?
I think, like I said, I think the design of the piece just kind of maybe leads me in directions. You know, the drones need big, thin wings, so they naturally would become wood. I want them to be smooth. I did do my first, it wasn't, I mean, it was the B-2 bomber I did when I was in grad school, and it was chopped. So I had changed the finish there. They're both clay, but I think, that smooth elegance of those made sense. Like the big axe downstairs, that would just be very difficult to make out of clay in a way. Could be done again, but, so I think I let those guide me, but there's just it's just a gut instinct as to what feels like the right material here. What's gonna make this thing the most beautiful? And some of the pieces, there's clay and wood elements together, little parts here and there to kind of accentuate each other. But it'd be like some ebony with the dark wood, or with the dark clay, so that they just kind of bounce back and forth there. I mean, I do want to just seduce you with these objects, just so beautiful, just so smooth and alluring, shiny, that you just can't help but want to look at them and touch them. Yeah, so I hope that answered your question.
Hi, Ben. I had a question about the role of this conflict that you keep on talking about, kind of wanting to create conflict, and I keep thinking about your process of the hand and like touching this thing and working this material and like over time to a point of like taking the craft to a certain level, and for me, I guess I'm asking, do you feel that that's kind of where the conflict gets almost like where it kind of comes in, so it transcends? I mean, these objects are not like made with a laser, or they're not, like printed, like 3D printed. They're really kind of, there's like this like intimacy with the object that I keep thinking about. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
I think a lot of the objects are industrial objects, for one. So I think to reproduce them in an industrial manner would just kind of take the wind out of it a little bit. Like I said, I want you to believe in these objects, and I never hide my touch. There are ceramic artists that, they want to make the thing is fake, not fake, but they want to fool you into believing the thing is something else. I don't want to do that. I don't change the color. I don't try to, I leave my hand in everything, and I've become more comfortable with that. And I think that just leaving that in a world where that's becoming less relevant, everything, as CNC printers are starting to take over, I think. I think it becomes more interesting, more exotic, and there's just like integrity in the object that people see that someone, that someone spent a long, long time caressing and grinding and working on this thing. And I think any good art, for me, if that has in it, it generally pulls me in, and I want to look at it and see the thing more. I mean, these paintings right here, I want to be pulled into them and find little brush strokes in the hand. I think they kind of operate in a similar way. We both look kind of almost hyper-real at some distance, but then when we get in close, there's really a lot of loose touch, I think, there. And so I don't want to go over to a machine way of making things. The story of the artist that makes his things, I think, is still compelling, and that's what I've trained to do. And so I think that story of that person, that you don't have to know what they are, but you know that they made the thing with their hands. It was not made on a CNC machine. So, I mean, I think that crux you're talking about going both ways. I mean, that's where I deliver it, is like that thing that's different. Sculptures have got they're special objects. We've got objects everywhere. They're like the most special, right?
That large piece at the end of the room, what kind of wood is it? How did you, what tool did you use to sand out the inside, the smooth section at the end? Thank you.
Which piece are you speaking of? The axe?
The huge piece at your largest piece, your largest sculpture.
Yeah, the axe head down there?
Yeah, that one.
Yeah, I mean, well, that was, you kind of saw in the pictures there that it was, maybe we could just go to, so it was a whole bunch of timbers glued together into a big blank, basically a form. And then it's Douglas fir, so it's a relatively soft wood. You want to be able to, you don't want to chop through walnut or something, or oak. That'd be very difficult. And then I just, I have a center line that I mark down, and I just chop down to the line. There's one line that goes around the whole thing, and you just keep removing wood until you kind of get there. And it takes a long time. And then the inside section, I did use some grinders and things to get in the interior, because that's a hard space. You can see there it's just a square spot. It turns in, it opened up. So that was also fun, holding a grinder in a hole. Really can't, that's just what you have to do to make the thing. So a lot of, when I'm doing this, there's always gloves, respirator. It's just this whole suite of equipment that you wear, ear protection. It's like almost like your second skin, just the hours and hours of working on these things. You put it all on, and you kind of are zoned out a little bit, listen to a book on tape or something while you grind for the evening.
I want to ask one last question, if I may. You mentioned looking into the intake of the drones, and also the issue of looking for the idea of a cockpit, a kind of human presence, now beginning to become strange to you. And I think about the objects downstairs, and I think about the way that they are presented, the way that they are removed, decontextualized, and I think about precedents in different kinds of art practice, and the way that imagery of power, imagery of industry, imagery of warfare could otherwise be presented. Say a history painting or a history frieze that might show a whole battle scene, then I think about the way that these objects are being presented in so many ways, really mimicking different kinds of formal presentation of sculpture or presentation of artifacts. The way that armor is encased in a museum, the way that an airplane is suspended in a place like the Air and Space Museum. But I also think of that isolation. I can't help but think of it as, to me, as relating to portraiture. In some ways, all of these things that are removed from the human wearer, the human user, or in the case of the drones, objects where the human presence has by design been removed, right? Mm-hmm. So I can't help but thinking about all of these things as things that in some way you look in the eye, even though there is no human presence there. And that goes from the most sinister in the case of the drones to me, to the most kind of playful, the way that, I think when I was a kid, I tended to look at fire hydrants and see the eyes and see the nose, right? The way that we anthropomorphize things. And so, I know that you are experimenting with portraiture, though it's not overtly represented in this show. And so I'm just wondering about the use of portraiture as a kind of strategy, whether we are dealing with actual human likenesses or human absences.
Yeah, it has grown out of the work, I think, for sure. I mean, the drones, you said, absolutely, there's a spot. I mean, I wouldn't say it's more than being human even. My cat knows to look at me in the eyes. Any animal does. There's something inherent to life, I think, on all levels that we look at each other in the eyes. So, so the drones have that. I mean, the helmets, I think, do it in a really wonderful way. That a lot of them have so many slits in different places for the eyes that I think you look at those, and in the same way that you're wondering, what are these things? Are these big metal helmets or whatever? You can't quite, subconsciously, you can't quite find eye contact. You're searching, you're looking around at the different slits that, you kind of maybe settle on one that kind of makes sense for the eye, but then you look up and there's a different eye there. It's almost an insect face or something. And then, the hydrants, I mean, they just naturally, you get these little standpipes, eyes emerge. I mean, we just do that naturally, right? We anthropomorphize things. I don't, I'm not confident calling myself a portrait, figure sculptor, but the humans are interesting. We find ourselves the most interesting thing. So those things, I'm not saying I'm searching for those, but I think objects that are interesting to me probably just pull me in that same way. That, those helmets are portraits without the person. They give a feeling, they all have when you line them up, you also really, those personalities come out. I find if I have one hydrant, it's kind of there. If you put 3 or 4 together, they're like, you know, the Three Stooges all of a sudden. I mean, they really have personality. So the grouping helps, but yeah, we're just, you know, we're looking, we're searching. That's kind of maybe the essence of sculpture, is to look and find the thing, but then when it looks back at you, it kind of makes, well, it brings life to the object for sure.
Well, thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
I just wanted to thank Ben and Christopher for giving us this marvelous evening's conversation, for Elizabeth East putting this together, and my colleagues for arranging everything, and for all of you for being in attendance. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you.